Hello, welcome to another episode of Book Reviews. I'm Shahida Rahman. Today's guest is Inbali Iserles. She's an award-winning author and an irrepressible animal lover. She's one of the authors of the New York Times bestselling Survivor series, writing under the pseudonym of Erin Hunter. And Inbali lives in Cambridge, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to the studio today. So hello, Inbali.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for coming along today.
My pleasure.
You've written quite a number of books, haven't you?
Yes, a few.
A few. Well, would you like to tell us about your first books?
Yes, well, so my very first book is called The Tiger and Cat, and I started writing it on and off back in 2002. And I wasn't actually looking to write a book at the time. I think I would have dreamt of being a writer or an artist or some sort of combination of the two, but it just seemed so unrealistic, a sort of impossible dream. And I'd filed it away in a file marked impossible. But years later, I was actually training to be a lawyer. And I was visiting my parents in Cambridge for the weekend and entertaining a little boy who was about to burst into tears. He didn't speak English, a Spanish boy. Who was over with family friends, and I dug out this book called Cats of the World, I seem to recall it, an encyclopedia of cat breeds, because I strongly believe, as an animal lover, it's impossible to be sad while looking at pictures of cats. And we were leafing through this nice book of cats, and there it had a picture of a cat. It said, "This is the Mao, the cat that most resembles the cats of ancient Egypt, the first domestic cats." And I thought, that's not right. From my cat-obsessed youth, I distinctly remembered that the same was often said about another breed of cats, the Abyssinian. Right. And I started to ponder this idea of a rivalry, an ancient rivalry between feline tribes. And after a few weeks, this was still going round and round and round in my head. And ultimately I thought, gosh, I'm going to have to write this book, aren't I? And because it was about cats, I thought, maybe that's going to be a children's book. And so I started reading lots of children's books and trying to get my head around what kids are reading these days. And then I started to write it.
I see. And I know one of your books actually won an award. Would you like to tell me more about that?
That was actually The Tiger and Cat. Right. I peaked at the first book.
I see.
I hope not. But that was Tiger and Cat won the Calderdale Children's Book of the Year, and it was shortlisted and longlisted for quite a few awards as well, which is great. And that award was wonderful because it's voted on by children. So it was a really fun day of talks and events. And
Fantastic. Yeah. And the book I'd like to talk about today is your latest book, which is out now, Foxcraft, #1, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's called The Taken.
Yes.
And I've actually read some of it, and I found that quite intriguing because it's through the eyes of a fox.
Yes.
In first person. That's very unusual for a book.
It is. You're absolutely right. It's extremely unusual. And I have to say that as someone who read quite a lot of animal stories and whatever animal fantasy I could find, not that there was that much of it going around when I was growing up, I was not aware of any that was first person. I'm still not really aware of any animal fantasy that's first person, so I was aware that I was doing something a bit different. Part of that is because I really wanted to get inside the mind of a fox. I wanted to get as close as possible. Now, there's a problem with fantasy and first person anyway, because when you're world building, you have this dramatic, epic landscape. And actually, Foxcraft is an epic. It spans over 3 books, and it's quite wide in its scope. So book 1, The Taken, takes place in the Greylands, the city. And it's a quest story where Isla, a young fox who's from the city, is looking for her family. And that quest takes her into book 2, into the wildlands, the countryside, this vast landscape of rivers and forests and mountains and so on. And she then is seeking the elders, these wise foxes. And ultimately it takes her to the frozen lair of the snow wolves up in the north. So it is a huge kind of landscape. And I've created all sorts of problems for myself by writing it first person. But it's worth it because I want it to be very, very close to that animal perspective.
Absolutely. And I think because you really have to understand animals to be able to write it in that kind of context, haven't you? And you obviously love foxes. I mean, how did you sort of create your story around, especially The Taken? Because I've read some of it, as I said, and you could sort of vividly imagine every sort of scene that you've actually written. And I think, that's amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. Do you know, it all started with the foxes of Middleton Square. So I lived for many, many years in Islington, down the road from here, and I saw foxes all the time. Now, when I speak to children in London, when I do events, and I say, put your hands up if you've seen a fox, they all do, because you can't really live in London without seeing foxes. They are such a phenomenon here, and yet we don't really understand them that much, and there's a lot of assumptions made about foxes which I've discovered were wrong. For instance, foxes are solitary. That's not true. They're actually family-oriented creatures. The male and female pair bond often for life, and both help to raise the cubs. Another thing that's often said about them is that they don't have a territory. They just wander and wander. That's not true either. They do have territories. Actually, in the city, they're very small territories. In the countryside, they have these sweeping territories, and it's all about the proximity of other foxes, food sources, and so on. So I found them quite intriguing characters, and the more I read about them, the more fascinated I became, but the more I realised that we've misunderstood them also in our legends and folklore, where they're often cast as the bad guy, right back from Aesop's fables and the story of the gingerbread man. They're always the bad guy in our stories, and I wanted to tell an alternative story.
Good. That's good. I think people sort of fear foxes. It's got that fear element in it.
But it's sort of the wild and the familiar, isn't it? It's a bit like what intrigued me about cats. There's something about them that's not quite known. They may tread in and out of your home, but how much do you really understand them? A fox, you probably don't want to invite inside your home. They're not terribly tidy guests, to say the least. But there are a lot of things about them a lot of fears. Foxes kill cats, foxes trespass, foxes take away babies. Actually, there's absolutely no documented evidence of that whatsoever, not the babies in particular. But I think there is something a bit scary about a wild animal of some size walking on the streets where we walk, and something intriguing and exciting as well, I think. So, for instance, it's often said about foxes that they lack territory, and this is sort of considered to be a bit sinister, a bit not to be trusted. What is it to have a creature without territory? But actually that's not true. They are territorial, and as I said, they pair bond often for life, so they will have a certain range with their families. In the city it tends to be quite a narrow range because they live so close to other foxes, other territories. In the countryside they can be quite wide ranges, but they are very misunderstood and generally considered to be cunning, devious, not to be trusted, intelligent, but not necessarily in a good way.
And very mysterious as well. I mean, particularly with children, they see foxes as a fear factor. So, I think through your story, you rather see them as a gentle, sort of furry animal. And I think that's a good way of portraying foxes through your story. And I think, that's a wonderful idea that you've actually put across. And I just wanted to ask you, who's your favourite author, apart from yourself?
Oh, I don't think I'd put myself up there among the greats, but
any sort of author who's particularly inspiring.
I mean, there are so many, and they change constantly, because every time I read a book and I think, wow, this is amazing, I love this book, and then I read another book and I think it's amazing. When I was a child, I was crazy about Tove Jansson's Moomin's Adventures. Did you read those?
Yes.
So
I watched the series on TV.
That was a really good series. I think they captured it really well, and that's a sort of magical other place as well, with a sort of abstracted Finland, I suppose, where she grew up, but of sort of fjords and lakes and waterfalls and all sorts of crazy animals and creatures, like this terrible force who, when she passed, everything turned to ice, this lonely creature who walked the valleys. It sort of made my hairs rise on end, but in a good way, in a way that children like to be scared.
I mean, I suppose you didn't plan to become a children's author. A lot of people say it just happened. I mean, would you say that for yourself? It just came out of nowhere?
I'm very much about following the story. If I think of a story that's not suitable for children, then I will continue to write it. I'll just write whatever comes into my head, really. So at the moment, I'm really, really excited about animal fantasy, and it's an area that is very natural to me. Probably because I'm such an enormous animal lover and a fantasy lover. I am someone who adores Lord of the Rings, for instance. But I also read extremely widely, and I wouldn't put it past myself to write in all sorts of different genres, because it's fun to experiment.
People say you should write what you know, and I think that would sort of fit exactly what you're writing. You know about foxes, you know about animals, and
well, I've learnt a lot more about foxes in the process. Cats I always knew about. Foxes, actually, I was surprised by how little I really understood about them, because they are quite different to dogs, and they're far less inclined to conflict, for instance. They are gentler animals, and they don't have they're not weaponized. They don't have particularly sharp claws. They don't have particularly sharp teeth. They don't like to fight. So that's why they like chickens, because they're so plump and soft and easy, and they've got these tiny beaks and they can't really fight back. You know, but they're not really into. That's why it's so rare for a fox to actually have a clash with a cat, because a cat is very weaponized. They're very scratchy and bitey and quite scary for a fox.
Okay, and your book's been translated into other languages, hasn't
it? It's currently out in German and Russian, and it's due to come out in quite a lot of languages. I don't remember what's next, but
what's the response you've had through readers and?
Well, it's really exciting when I get readers who've read it in German and Russian, who I am getting quite a lot of. And I've heard there are quite a few Russian foxcraft communities online and social media, which is really cool. And I know that in Germany there are as well, because they often use different sites to Facebook. Like there'll be specific social media sites in different countries. So there are foxcraft communities now growing in different territories.
It's a great achievement as well, I think, to have that translated as well.
It's not my agent's achievement, really.
I mean, without you, obviously, these books wouldn't be.
Well, I like to think the time of the fox is here. I think that foxes, actually, we see them now. Have you noticed they're like foxes on sweatshirts, and foxes have sort of entered into our world a little bit, and it feels like their time has come. But they are unrepresented in stories. The eyes of the fox.
You see that on a T-shirt or what have you. No, that's great. And apart from your writing, what else do you like to do? Do you have any hobbies?
Well, I don't have a huge amount of time for hobbies. I have recently taken up yoga, which is quite interesting. Cool. Yeah, it's really good. It's sort of it's very centering, actually. I think I was one of these people who was a bit scared off by yoga because I thought you had to be incredibly good and bendy and serious. But I don't do a very serious yoga course. I do a sort of a fun, nice, relaxed one, and it just gives me an hour and a half every week of quiet. I should be doing it when I'm not at the class, but I don't really do it. And then really I just love getting out and about. Part of the reason for moving to Cambridge is all the green spaces and the opportunities to just walk about and see things, and then whenever I can, read books, take in art, anything inspiring and fun and diverse.
And the busy life that you do have, I think it's great to do yoga to move away from that, move away from the stress.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. It's a bit like mindfulness or meditation. I mean, it's not a meditation class, though I think meditation is a very powerful thing, and I encourage people to try it if they haven't, but it is just that stillness, the sort of being in the moment.
Yes, absolutely. And do you have any advice for any wannabe writers out there, anyone who's seeking to get published? What would be your top tip?
One top tip. I think if it was going to be boiled down to one, it's perseverance. That this just don't give up, the age-old adage, but it's true. It is tough out there, and there's a huge element of chance, because a lot of it's just getting it in front of the right person. But you can improve your own luck through simply working on it as much as possible, making sure what you've got is as good as it can possibly be, practice, edit, read your own work, and then get it out to people and make sure it's got out to the right people. And don't give up.
Yes, and because it's not the right time in one particular year, it might be the right time in the following year. So.
A story will have its day, and I have myself need to remember that and be philosophical about it, because you never know where a career can take you. But I do really strongly believe that a story will have its time, and if someone writes something and they put it out and it doesn't get picked up, it's not the end of the world. And apart from anything else, the process of writing it, you've grown and you've learnt a lot. But at some stage, that story is going to come back, and suddenly it's going to seize the day.
Absolutely. I mean, it must have taken you a long time to get your first book published, would you say?
I think it did, surprisingly not as long as it ought to have done, which probably won't win me any fans among people trying to get published.
No,
I think I was lucky with the Tiger and Cat because I think people suddenly could see the possibilities of kind of the feline war and so on. It hasn't all been smooth sailing since then. In many ways, Tigrine was an easier book to sell than the follow-up book I wrote, The Bloodstone Bird. And then for several years I wrote under a pen name, Erin Hunter, which is very, very popular in the States, as you mentioned at the start. And I wasn't immediately going to write Foxcraft at the time. I'd been thinking about a Fox fantasy for a while, but then it just felt like the time was right. So I think a lot is about timing, but isn't that true of life?
Fantastic. And where can all the readers out there buy a copy of your book?
Well, Foxcraft is available at all good bookshops. It's certainly available online via Hive, Amazon, and all of those sites, Waterstones as well, and ideally your independent bookshops there, insofar as they still exist.
Fantastic. And you got your own website as well. Do you want to?
I've got my own website, which is Inbali-Iserles.com, because my name is so absurd that it's impossible to not have a break in the middle. I should also say that because it's published by Scholastic, Foxcraft series it sells via the Scholastic book fairs, which is a really exciting, cool thing that we don't think we had this when we were kids. The book fairs come into the school and the children get to actually pick the books up and spend some time with them in a way that they don't really have an opportunity to do in a bookshop. And I think it's kind of a nice egalitarian option for books, because the children themselves tend to choose at the book fairs, and I think that's what makes them particularly cool.
Fantastic. I think you've got a wonderful story. It's so interesting to hear about your book. And could you please read us a short extract of your book?
Oh, sure.
I'd love to hear that.
I'll read you something very short. So Foxcraft, I haven't really told you what Foxcraft's about, other than the fact that Isla is on a quest to find her family. In essence, Foxcraft, well, what do I mean by Foxcraft? Foxcraft is fox magic. And it's really by looking at foxes and looking at the different things they seem to be able to do, sort of the ability to appear and disappear almost as though by magic. So invisibility, slimmering. Also, there are lots of legends from Japan about the shape-shifting fox, the kitsune. And in this story, foxes of particular ability can perform wakir, which is shape-shifting. But it's not as easy as it sounds, and it drains life force. So for every Foxcraft, for every element of fox magic, there is training, there is difficulty, and there is great risk as well. What I'm going to read you is a short passage where Isla actually does master slimmering. It's a bit of a spoiler because it's quite far in. I won't tell you too much about the sequence, but slimmering doesn't just happen. It's not like you put on a cloak of invisibility and you're gone. You have to master it. And here Isla has been caught by the trappers, the sort of people who, it's like a pound where they gather up the wild foxes, and it's not a good place for her to be, and she's in a cage. And I should also say that the furless is what foxes call humans. I took a deep breath, my mind tripping over the chant as I prowled to the edge of the cage. What is seen is unseen, what was sensed becomes senseless. I hunched against the mesh, holding my breath. What was bone is bending, what was fur is air. The furless were drawing closer. I could sense their milky scent through the wire door. A gleam rose where they stood, but around them the world became cloaked in darkness. They seemed to pause uncertainly, to abandon the cage and return. Through the sticky pitch of my slimmer, I could hear them barking and sense their confusion as they peered inside the cage once more to find it empty.
Thank you. That sounds absolutely wonderful. It's such a fantastic book, and thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Shahida.
To see a box through its own eyes, I think it's just absolutely amazing. So any readers out there, I do hope they'll go out and buy your book. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to end the show with a quote. Either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. And that was written by Benjamin Franklin. Thank you very much for watching. I'd like to thank Inbali, my guest today. Until next time, goodbye.